The morning sun over Manhattan did not warm the boardroom on the 42nd floor of Vance Global. It merely illuminated the cold, sharp edges of it. Elena Vance sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, her posture as rigid and flawless as the skyscrapers slicing through the skyline outside. At 55, she possessed the kind of quiet, commanding elegance that money could buy, but only decades of absolute authority could perfect. Her tailored Chanel suit was an armor of midnight blue, complemented by a single strand of South Sea pearls. To her left sat the board of directors, men and women who managed billions, but still looked at Elena with a mixture of reverence and fear. To her right sat her son, Julian, tapping anxiously on his tablet, his mind clearly buried in the logistics of the upcoming initial public offering. And directly across from Elena sat Chloe. Chloe, 28, an Ivy League MBA graduate with a razor-sharp bob and eyes that always seemed to be calculating the net worth of everyone in the room, was Julian's wife of 3 years. Today, Chloe was unusually still. She wasn't looking at her tablet. She was looking at Elena. If we look at the third-quarter projections for the European acquisition, Julian began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room, we are looking at a sustained 7% growth post-IPO. The compliance team has already cleared the regulatory hurdles in Luxembourg. Elena nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Good work, Julian. But ensure the liquidity reserves are verified by an independent auditor. We cannot afford an oversight when the SEC is looking over our shoulders. On it, mother, Julian replied, typing a quick note. Elena glanced around the room, sensing a shift in the air. The atmosphere was thick, not with the usual corporate tension, but with an underlying current of anticipation. She noticed Chloe's fingers lightly drumming against the leather surface of her portfolio. Chloe's lips were curved into the faintest ghost of a smile of someone who knew a secret the rest of the world was about to find out. There was a soft, rhythmic knock on the heavy double doors of the boardroom. The room fell silent. It was highly unusual for a closed-door executive session to be interrupted. Marcus, Elena's personal assistant of 15 years, stepped inside. His face, usually an unshakable mask of professional calm, was pale. He held a thick, heavy manila envelope in his hands. He didn't look at the board. He looked directly at Elena. Mrs. Vance, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, tight register that barely carried across the room. I apologize for the intrusion. A courier just delivered this to the front desk. It was marked urgent, confidential, and for your eyes only. The sender indicated it pertains directly to the corporate governance disclosure for the IPO. Julian frowned. Marcus, we're in the middle of a voting session. Can't it wait? No, sir, Marcus said, his eyes darting briefly toward Chloe before returning to Elena. It cannot. Elena extended her hand, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Bring it here, Marcus. The boardroom was so quiet that the rustle of the paper envelope as Marcus handed it to Elena sounded like a small explosion. Elena felt the weight of it. It was heavy, rigid with photographic paper. She looked across the table. Chloe had stopped drumming her fingers. She was leaning back in her ergonomic chair, her eyes locked onto Elena's hands, waiting for the crack in the matriarch's armor. Elena used a silver letter opener to slice the top of the envelope. She reached inside and pulled out a stack of high-definition, glossy 8x10 photographs. The first image was captured in the soft, golden light of late afternoon. It showed a private villa in the Hamptons, surrounded by manicured hedges. In the center of the frame was Arthur Vance, Elena's husband of 30 years. Arthur, a man whose handsome features were beginning to lose their battle with age, was smiling with a boyish, unburdened joy that Elena hadn't seen on his face in over a decade. His arm was wrapped tightly around the waist of a stunning, 26-year-old brunette with a laugh that practically radiated off the paper. Elena slid the first photo behind the stack to reveal the second. This one was a close-up, taken through a high-powered telephoto lens. Arthur and the young woman were on the balcony of the villa. His hands were on her face, his eyes closed, his lips pressed against hers in an undeniable, passionate embrace. The third photo showed them entering the villa together at midnight, Arthur's hand resting intimately on the small of her back. The fourth was a screenshot of a bank ledger, detailing a wire transfer of $50,000 from one of the Vance family's auxiliary accounts to a boutique art consultancy firm registered under the name Harper Stone. The brunette in the photographs. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a violent, suffocating thud that threatened to choke her. The humiliation was instantaneous, a hot, searing wave that rushed from her chest to her throat. 30 years. 30 years of building a dynasty, of protecting his reputation, of enduring his quiet insecurities and presenting a united, unbreakable front to the vultures of Wall Street. And here he was, buying art and renting villas for a girl young enough to be his daughter, funding it with the very legacy she had bled to protect. For a fraction of a second, the room blurred. Elena felt the sudden, desperate urge to stand up, to throw the photographs across the table, to scream at the sky, to demand to know how he could be so pathetic, so reckless, so weak. But then, she looked up. And she saw Chloe. Chloe wasn't looking away out of politeness or shock. She was staring directly at Elena, her eyes wide with a predatory hunger. The smirk on Chloe's face was unmistakable now. It was the look of a hunter watching a majestic beast step directly into a steel trap. Chloe's eyes flicked down to the photographs and back up to Elena's face, silently begging for the tears, waiting for the gasp, waiting for the powerful Elena Vance to collapse in public, so that the vulnerability could be exploited, documented, and used to tear the reins of Vance Global from her hands. In that precise moment, the emotional tempest inside Elena froze into solid ice. The pain didn't vanish, it transformed. It became a cold, calculating clarity. She realized that if she broke now, the headline tomorrow wouldn't just be about Arthur's infidelity. It would be about Elena Vance's instability, an excuse for the board to invoke the key person clause and transition power to the next generation, to Julian, and by extension, to Chloe. Elena took a slow, deep breath, expanding her lungs, forcing the tension out of her shoulders. She neatly stacked the photographs, face down on the mahogany table. Her hands did not shake. Her voice, when she spoke, was as smooth and level as a calm ocean. "Thank you, Marcus. You may leave us." Marcus nodded, relief washing over his face, and quickly exited the room. Julian looked at his mother, confusion knitting his brow. "Mother? What is it? Is there an issue with the disclosure?" Elena looked at her son, seeing his genuine innocence, and then her gaze shifted back to Chloe. She locked her eyes onto her daughter-in-law, refusing to blink, refusing to give her even a millimeter of satisfaction. The smirk on Chloe's lips faltered slightly, replaced by a subtle, uneasy twitch of her eyebrow. She hadn't expected this. She had expected a breakdown. Elena leaned forward, her pearls clicking softly against the edge of the table. "It's nothing that requires the board's immediate attention, Julian," Elena said, her tone carrying a terrifying, quiet confidence. She didn't break eye contact with Chloe. "Just a minor, predictable internal liability that I will personally liquidate before the end of the week." Chloe's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation passing through them before she quickly masked it with a polite, corporate nod. Elena calmly picked up her pen, tapped the top of her tablet, and looked around the room at the waiting directors. "Let's proceed to item 2 on the agenda, the restructuring of the family trust voting shares." The silence of the 42nd floor executive elevator was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic hum of the descent. Elena Vance stood perfectly still, her reflection in the polished mirrored walls showing a woman entirely in control. Her hands, clad in fine leather gloves, held her briefcase with a steady grip. But beneath the immaculate tailoring of her Chanel suit, her chest felt constricted, as if the air in Manhattan had suddenly grown too thin to breathe. The door slid open to the subterranean VIP parking garage. Her black Mercedes Maybach sat idling, its headlights cutting through the dim concrete space. Her driver, Thomas, stepped out to open the door, his eyes respectfully downcast. Elena climbed into the plush leather interior. The door ceiling shut with a heavy, vacuum thud that shut out the rest of the world. Only then did she allow her eyes to close. Only then did the first fracture appear in her armor. 30 years. She had met Arthur when Vance Global was just an ambitious real estate firm operating out of a cramped office in Midtown. Her father had built the foundation, but Elena had built the empire. Arthur had been the charming, handsome face. The man who could smooth over difficult city council members and charm wealthy investors over scotch at the Yale Club. Elena had allowed him that role. She had actively nurtured his ego, stepping back into the shadows of the boardroom, so he could feel like the patriarch he desperately wanted to be. And in return, she had expected one thing: absolute loyalty to the family name. She opened her briefcase, pulling out the glossy photographs. She stared at Arthur's face. He looked ridiculous. A 57-year-old man in a linen shirt, laughing like a teenager under the Hamptons sun. The girl, Harper Stone, was beautiful, certainly, but it was a manufactured, transactional beauty. Elena's eyes narrowed as she studied the bank ledger screenshot. $52,000. It wasn't the amount that insulted her. It was the sheer amateurish stupidity of the paper trail. Arthur was careless, but he wasn't this stupid. He knew Elena monitored the auxiliary accounts. Unless he hadn't been the one to leave the trail. Elena pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. It didn't ring twice. Elena, a gravelly low voice answered. It was Vance, her father's former head of security, now running a private intelligence firm that catered exclusively to the city's elite. I saw the market fluctuations this morning. Is the IPO on track? The IPO is fine, Vance. I need an off-the-books asset verification, Elena said, her voice dropping into a cold, transactional register. Look into a boutique art consultancy firm registered in Delaware under the name Harper Stone. Find out who opened the account. Find the IP addresses associated with the wire transfers from my husband's auxiliary account. And most importantly, find out who paid the photographer who delivered a package to my boardroom today. There was a brief pause on the other end, the sound of a keyboard clicking. Give me 3 hours. You have 2, Elena said and hung up. By the time the Maybach pulled up to the iron gates of the Vance estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, bleeding shadows across the sprawling lawn. Elena walked into the grand foyer, the marble floors echoing with the sharp click of her heels. Arthur, she called out, her voice echoing in the vaulted space. No answer. The house was empty, save for the quiet movements of the housekeeping staff. A text from Arthur popped up on her phone a moment later. Asterisk in meetings in the city tonight, darling. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you. Asterisk. Elena stared at the screen, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. Meetings. She walked upstairs to her private study, a room lined with dark walnut shelves and first edition books, and sat behind her desk. She didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the deepening twilight, waiting. Exactly 90 minutes later, her phone buzzed. A secure PDF file appeared in her inbox from Vance. Elena opened it, the blue light of the screen illuminating the sharp lines of her face. As she scrolled through the data, the pieces of the puzzle began to violently lock into place, and the true nature of the trap was revealed. The emotional weight of Arthur's betrayal shifted, instantly replaced by the cold, adrenaline-fueled instinct of an apex predator under attack. Arthur hadn't met Harper Stone by accident at a gallery opening. Harper Stone was a high-end corporate operative, a honey trap, whose services were paid for through a labyrinth of shell companies originating from a Cayman Islands account. Elena tracked the beneficial ownership of that Cayman account through Vance's forensic banking report. The owner was a company called CV Holdings. Chloe Vance. Elena leaned back in her chair, her breath catching in her throat. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Chloe hadn't just discovered Arthur's affair, Chloe had authored it. She had researched Arthur's psychological vulnerabilities, his fading youth, his resentment of Elena's power, his desire to be viewed as a benefactor. And she had handpicked Harper Stone to exploit them. But the trap went deeper. Elena scrolled down to the corporate bylaws section of the report. Chloe had recently filed a confidential memorandum with the Vance Global Legal Compliance Committee, a committee she chaired. The memorandum outlined a proposed morality and reputational stability clause for the upcoming IPO. Under this clause, if any senior executive or their spouse became involved in a public scandal that threatened the company's valuation, their voting shares would be temporarily frozen and managed by a neutral third-party trustee to protect shareholder interests. Elena's eyes went cold. The trustee designated in Chloe's draft was a financial firm controlled by Chloe's own father. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. Chloe's plan was to orchestrate Arthur's public downfall, wait for Elena to react emotionally, to file for a messy, public, high-profile divorce that would dominate the tabloids right before the IPO pricing, and then trigger the morality clause. Elena would be legally sidelined from her own company, stripped of her voting power, while Julian, guided entirely by Chloe, would be elevated to chief executive. Chloe wasn't just trying to break Elena's marriage. She was trying to execute a bloodless corporate coup. A soft knock on the study door broke Elena's concentration. The door opened, and Julian stepped in, holding 2 glasses of scotch. "Mother? Why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked, walking over and setting a glass on her desk. His face was etched with genuine worry. "You looked different after that package arrived today. Is everything okay with Dad? I tried calling him, but he said he was tied up with an art acquisition for the new downtown office." Elena looked at her son. Julian had his father's eyes, but none of his father's malice. He was brilliant with technology, gentle, and utterly blind to the viper he had brought into their home. He truly loved Chloe, believing her to be his partner in building the future. Elena felt a sudden, fierce wave of maternal protection wash over her, burning away the last remnants of her grief. If she exposed Chloe to Julian right now, without ironclad, undeniable legal finality, Chloe would manipulate him. She would play the victim, accuse Elena of paranoia and jealousy, and force Julian to choose between his mother and his wife. Elena could not risk losing her son. "Everything is fine, Julian," Elena said, her voice softening as she took the glass of scotch. "Just the usual pre-IPO exhaustion. Your father is just being his usual, eccentric self." Julian smiled, relieved, and leaned against the edge of the desk. "Good. Because Chloe is planning a massive dinner party for the board this Thursday at our penthouse. She wants to celebrate the final regulatory approval. She said she has a major surprise announcement that will solidify the family's position forever." Elena swallowed a sip of the amber liquid, the alcohol burning a clean trail down her throat. A surprise announcement. No doubt the public unveiling of Arthur's affair, timed perfectly to maximize the psychological damage and force the board's hand. "A dinner party sounds lovely," Elena said, her voice steady, her eyes reflecting the cold blue light of her phone screen. "Tell Chloe I wouldn't miss it for the world." After Julian left, Elena picked up her phone again. She didn't call Vance this time. She called the family's personal estate attorney, a man who had managed the Vance family trusts for 40 years. "Arthur and I signed a postnuptial agreement in 2018 after his bad investment in the shipping line," Elena stated, her tone leaving no room for pleasantries. "I need you to pull the exact verbiage of Section 9, Paragraph 4. The infidelity and asset forfeiture clause." "I remember it well, Elena," the attorney replied, his voice cautious. "If either party engages in a documented extramarital relationship that results in the dissipation of marital assets, the offending party forfeits all claims to joint property, including inherited corporate shares, and waives all rights to alimony." "But Elena, that clause requires undeniable proof of intent and financial transaction." "I have the photographs, I have the wire transfers, and I have the name of the woman," Elena said quietly. "That will ruin Arthur," the attorney warned. "But if it becomes public before the IPO, the market reaction will." "It won't become public on Chloe's terms," Elena interrupted, a dangerous smile spreading across her face in the dark room. "It will become public on mine. Prepare the asset seizure paperwork, Michael. Keep it completely confidential. We are going to give my daughter-in-law the exact stage she built, but she's going to be the one who takes the fall." The Wednesday morning air inside Arthur Vance's private office at the downtown Gallery District was thick with the scent of expensive oil paint, aged leather, and betrayal. Elena Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the yellow cabs crawl through the rain-slicked streets below. She held a porcelain teacup in her hand, the porcelain cool against her manicured fingers. She looked entirely like a supportive wife visiting her husband's passion project. But beneath the calm facade, her mind was executing a clinical, multi-layered counteroffensive. Arthur was sitting at his grand oak desk, frantically typing on his phone, a nervous sweat glistening on his forehead. The boyish, unburdened joy he had displayed in the Hamptons photographs was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic paranoia of a man trying to live a double life. "You seem distracted, Arthur," Elena said smoothly, turning around to face him. Her voice was gentle, lacking any trace of the icy steel she had utilized in the boardroom 48 hours prior. "The curator mentioned you've been spending a significant amount of time out of the city checking on the new acquisitions. I hope you aren't overexerting yourself. The IPO dinner at Julian and Chloe's penthouse is tomorrow night, and we need to present a unified front to the board." Arthur jumped slightly at the sound of her voice, quickly flipping his phone face down on the desk. He forced a charming, practiced smile that no longer reached his eyes. "Of course, corporate matters, darling. Just managing the logistics for the new installations. Harper Stone, the consultant I hired, has been very demanding with the deadlines. You know how these creative types are. But it's all for the prestige of the Vance name." "Harper Stone." Elena repeated the name slowly, letting it roll off her tongue like a bitter vintage. She walked over to his desk, her movements fluid and unhurried. "Yes, Chloe mentioned her to me. She said Harper is an absolute prodigy in sourcing rare contemporary pieces. In fact, Chloe was the one who highly recommended her to you, wasn't she?" Arthur's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second, a tell he had possessed since his 20s whenever he felt trapped. "Yes, well, Chloe has an eye for talent. She thought Harper could help elevate our corporate profile before the public offering. It's all about the narrative, right?" "Always about the narrative," Elena murmured. She reached out and gently straightened the silk pocket square in Arthur's blazer. Her touch was affectionate, but to anyone who truly knew Elena, it was the gesture of a tailor measuring a body for a shroud. "I just want to ensure you are being taken care of, Arthur. After 30 years, your legacy is my legacy. Remember that." "I know, Elena. I know," Arthur said, a flash of genuine guilt crossing his face before his phone buzzed violently against the wood. He glanced at the screen, his posture instantly stiffening. I actually have to take this. A conference call with the logistics team in London." "Of course. I'll leave you to your work," Elena said. She picked up her Hermes handbag, gave him a polite nod, and walked out of the office. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind her, Elena's expression froze. She walked down the gallery corridor, her heels snapping against the polished concrete floors. She didn't need to guess who was calling Arthur. It was Harper, no doubt acting under Chloe's precise instructions to lure him into the final, catastrophic trap scheduled for the next evening. Elena pulled out her phone and walked into the building's private stairwell, securing her privacy. She dialed Vance. "Report," she commanded. "Chloe just finalized the guest list for the penthouse dinner tomorrow." Vance's gravelly voice echoed through the encrypted line. "Every major shareholder of Vance Global will be there, including the institutional investors from Vanguard and BlackRock. But here's the kicker, Elena. Chloe just approved a VIP press credential for a senior investigative reporter from the Wall Street Journal. The reporter was told they would be receiving an exclusive, anonymous leak regarding a massive corporate governance scandal within the Vance family that could halt the IPO." Elena leaned against the concrete wall, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "She's not just trying to sideline me. She's trying to execute a public execution. She wants the scandal to break in front of the entire board and the premier financial press simultaneously. If the journal prints a story about Arthur misusing corporate funds to pay a mistress through an unvetted consultancy firm, the board will have no choice but to freeze our collective voting shares immediately." "It gets worse," Vance continued. "Our forensic team tracked an encrypted chat log between Chloe and Harper from an hour ago. Harper is scheduled to arrive at the Penthouse Hotel suite directly beneath Julian and Chloe's residence at 8 p.m. tomorrow. She has been instructed to text Arthur to meet her there for an emergency regarding the wire transfers. Chloe has already hired a private photographer to capture Arthur entering the room, and she plans to project those images, along with the bank records, onto the boardroom presentation screens during her closing toast." Elena felt the emotional gravity of the situation pulling at her, but she refused to sink. Chloe's ruthlessness was almost admirable in its meticulous execution, but it possessed one fatal flaw. It relied entirely on the assumption that Elena Vance was a fragile, prideful woman who would react with blind rage upon discovering her husband's infidelity. Chloe had prepared for a crying wife. She had not prepared for a seasoned chief executive. Vance, can your team intercept the penthouse security systems? Elena asked, her voice dropping into a dangerous, whisper-quiet register. We already have, Vance replied. We've bypassed the main server room for the entire building. We can control the digital displays, the elevators, and the security cameras in the VIP residential wing. Good, Elena said, a dark, brilliant plan solidifying in her mind. Here is what you are going to do. You are going to make a financial offer to Harper Stone that she cannot refuse. Chloe is paying her through a shell company. You will double that amount from my personal offshore account in Geneva, completely untraceable. But Harper doesn't get paid to leave the country. She gets paid to change her script. What's the play? Vance asked, a tone of rare respect creeping into his voice. Harper will still text Arthur. Arthur will still go down to that hotel suite. But instead of a private photographer capturing a sordid affair, Harper will ensure that the conversation is recorded via a high-definition hidden camera, specifically focusing on Arthur admitting that Chloe was the one who facilitated their introduction, arranged the wire transfers, and told him which accounts to use. I want Arthur to explicitly state on camera that Chloe assured him the transactions were completely legal and pre-approved by the compliance committee. And what about the Wall Street Journal reporter? Leave them, Elena said, her lips curving into a lethal smile. A reporter wants a story, Vance. We are going to give them a much bigger story than a simple midlife crisis. We are going to give them a story about corporate espionage, extortion, and the complete destruction of an ambitious young executive. Later that evening, Elena returned to the Greenwich estate. The house was quiet, suffocatingly so. She sat at the long dining table alone, a plate of untouched food in front of her. For 30 years she had sat at this table, planning the future of her family, believing that every sacrifice she made was building a fortress that would protect them for generations. She looked up at the oil portrait of her and Arthur hanging above the fireplace, painted 10 years ago, when they were at the pinnacle of their social power. She remembered the way he used to hold her hand under the table during difficult negotiations, the way he used to whisper that they were an unbeatable team. It had all been an illusion, a fragile construct designed to feed a man's ego until it grew large enough to swallow his loyalty whole. The grief was a heavy physical ache in her chest, but she actively forced it down, compartmentalizing the pain into a dark corner of her mind. She could not afford the luxury of sorrow tonight. Tomorrow was the battle, and she needed to be entirely devoid of sentimentality. She stood up, walked over to her desk, and opened the folder containing the post-nuptial agreement her attorney had prepared. She reviewed the asset seizure documents one final time. Every property, every offshore account, every single share of Vance Global that Arthur possessed was tied directly to his marital fidelity. By entering that hotel room tomorrow night, Arthur wouldn't just be breaking his vows. He would be legally executing his own financial eviction. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. *Hi mother, just checking in. Everything is set for tomorrow night at 7 p.m. The board is incredibly excited, and I have a wonderful tribute planned for you and Dad to celebrate 30 years of marriage and the launch of the IPO. Can't wait to see you. Elena stared at the glowing text message, the sheer hypocrisy of it vibrating through the screen. Chloe truly believed she had won. She believed she was 24 hours away from standing on Elena's neck and claiming the empire for herself. Elena typed a short, elegant response. Thank you, Chloe. Your dedication to this family never ceases to amaze me. I am looking forward to seeing exactly what you have prepared. She locked her phone, walked to the window, and looked out into the darkness of the Connecticut woods. The storm was coming, but for the first time in days, Elena felt completely at peace. She was no longer the victim of a sordid betrayal. She was the architect of an absolute liquidation. Chloe had built a beautiful, intricate trap, but she had forgotten that a trap is only effective if the wolf doesn't know the hunter is standing right behind her. The rain had stopped by Thursday evening, leaving Manhattan wrapped in a cold, heavy fog that rolled off the East River. At 6:45 p.m., The black Maybach pulled up to the curb of the exclusive glass residential tower in Tribeca where Julian and Chloe owned the two-story penthouse. Elena stepped out into the crisp night air. She wore a striking gown of emerald green silk, a color of absolute precision and wealth, layered beneath a tailored black cashmere coat. Her diamond earrings caught the flash of a lone paparazzi camera stationed down the block. She paused for a fraction of a second, smoothed her gloves, and walked into the lobby. She was a woman walking into an ambush, and she had never looked more magnificent. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer, immediately enveloping Elena in the low, sophisticated hum of high society chatter. The scent of expensive catering, white orchids, and vintage champagne filled the air. The apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist architecture, featuring soaring double-height ceilings and panoramic glass walls that displayed the glittering matrix of the New York skyline. Elena, darling, you look absolutely spectacular, a voice chimed from the crowd. It was Richard Sterling, one of Vance Global's oldest board members, and a close friend of Elena's late father. Thank you, Richard, Elena replied, offering a warm, practiced smile as she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. It's a historic week for all of us. The IPO pricing is looking incredibly strong. Thanks to your steady hand, Richard murmured, clinking his glass against hers. Though I must say, your daughter-in-law has been working overtime. She's already talking to the institutional investors over by the terrace about some major structural changes she's proposing for the corporate governance model. Elena's eyes flicked across the crowded room. There, standing near the glass doors of the terrace, was Chloe. She was wearing a sleek, cream-colored dress that screamed modern executive leadership. She was locked in deep conversation with two representatives from Vanguard, her gestures confident and sharp. Standing just a few feet away from Chloe was a man in a rumpled charcoal suit, sipping a club soda and taking quiet mental notes. Elena recognized him instantly from the file Vance had compiled. David Miller, the senior investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Chloe had placed the predator directly inside the house, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash him upon the family legacy. As if sensing Elena's gaze, Chloe turned her head. Her eyes locked onto Elena's emerald gown. The younger woman's lips curved into a dazzling, triumphant smile. She excused herself from the investors and walked briskly across the marble floor, her heels counting down the seconds of her perceived victory. "Mother, you made it!" Chloe exclaimed, extending her arms for a brief, superficial cheek press that carried no warmth. "I am so incredibly happy you're here. This night is entirely about honoring the foundation you built." "You've done a remarkable job with the arrangements, Chloe," Elena said, her voice a calm, steady purr. She looked directly into Chloe's eyes, watching for any sign of hesitation. There was none. Chloe's confidence was a concrete wall. "I noticed David Miller is here. A bold choice for a private celebratory dinner." Chloe didn't flinch. She simply smoothed the skirt of her dress. "A strategic choice, Mother. When we launch the IPO tomorrow, we want the financial press to know that Vance Global operates with absolute transparency. Investors love a company that has nothing to hide." "Transparency can be a double-edged sword, my dear," Elena murmured softly, taking a slow sip of her champagne. "Sometimes, when you shine a light into the darkness, you catch things you didn't intend to see." Before Chloe could decode the comment, Julian approached them, looking sharp but visibly exhausted, his arms sliding naturally around his wife's waist. "Hey Mom, have you seen Dad? He texted me saying he was running late from a gallery meeting, but the main presentations start in 15 minutes. Chloe's eyes flashed with a sudden, sharp intensity. She glanced down at her diamond-encrusted watch. It was exactly 7:55 p.m. "I'm sure he's just stuck in traffic, Julian. Actually, sweetie, why don't you go check with the AV team and make sure the projection screens are synced for my closing toast? I'll wait here with Mother." "Sure thing," Julian said, kissing Chloe's temple before disappearing back into the crowd. Elena watched her son walk away, a profound, heavy ache tightening in her chest. Chloe was using Julian as a pawn in her own game, entirely unbothered by the fact that destroying Arthur and sidelining Elena would traumatize her own husband. The psychological coldness of the girl was staggering. It eliminated the last shred of mercy Elena had left. Chloe pulled her phone from her clutch, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced speed. Elena's own phone, nestled in her handbag, vibrated once. It was a silent notification from Vance's surveillance feed. Target 1 Harper has initiated contact. Right on cue, across the room, Arthur Vance walked out of the private elevator. He looked disheveled, his tie slightly askew, his face flushed. He didn't look at the board members. He didn't look at his son. He looked directly at Chloe, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate panic. Chloe gave Arthur a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes flicking toward the hallway that led back to the building's residential elevator bank. Arthur's phone buzzed in his hand. Elena knew exactly what the text message from Harper Stone said, because she had approved the script 2 hours ago. Arthur, the compliance auditors are tracking the $50,000 transfer. They know it came from the auxiliary account. I'm in the Hotel Suite 14, be directly below the penthouse. Come down right now or I'm calling the press. Arthur swallowed hard, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, and turned on his heel. He slipped out of the penthouse foyer and back into the elevator lobby, entirely unaware that he was stepping off the edge of a financial cliff. Chloe watched him leave, her chest rising and falling with a sharp, ecstatic breath. The trap had sprung. Arthur was descending to the hotel suite where he would be caught, documented, and ruined. She turned back to Elena, her mask of filial piety completely slipping for the first time. The smile on Chloe's face was no longer professional. It was cruel, mocking, and deeply arrogant. The board is sitting down for dinner now, Mother, Chloe said, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper that was entirely lost beneath the ambient music of the party. You should probably find your seat at the head of the table. Enjoy the view of the city while you can. Because after my toast tonight, the landscape of Vance Global is going to look very, very different. Elena looked at her daughter-in-law. She felt no anger, no panic, no desire to strike back with words. She felt only the cold, absolute satisfaction of a grandmaster who had just watched an opponent move their king into a checkmate they couldn't see. I have always loved the view from this height, Chloe, Elena replied, her voice entirely devoid of fear, her eyes as hard and unyielding as jade. But the higher you stand, the harder the fall when the glass beneath you shatters. Let's go inside. I wouldn't want to keep your audience waiting. Chloe smirked, entirely dismissing the warning as the desperate bravado of a defeated matriarch. She turned and led the way into the grand dining room, where 30 of the most powerful financial minds in New York were sitting down around a long, candlelit table. Elena followed her slowly, her emerald silk dress whispering against the floor. Beneath her calm exterior, her phone vibrated again in her clutch. It was a 2-word message from Vance. Camera live. The climax had arrived. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling in Suite 14B, and Chloe Vance was about to give the performance of her life, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was the one about to be executed. The crystal chandeliers above the grand dining table dimmed precisely at 8:15 p.m. A soft, expectant hush fell over the room as Chloe Vance stood up from her seat, a silver microphone in her hand. Her cream dress caught the subtle ambient light, making her look every bit like the heir apparent to the Vance dynasty. At the head of the table sat Elena, her emerald silk gown draped elegantly over her chair, her face a serene, unreadable portrait. Beside her, Julian looked around the room, his brow furrowed. "Where the hell is Dad?" he whispered to Elena. "The main course is being served, and his seat is still empty." "Don't worry, Julian," Elena whispered back, her voice a calm bomb. "Your father is exactly where he needs to be." Across the room, Chloe tapped her microphone, the sharp sound echoing through the premium Bose surround system. Behind her, a massive, hidden 120-inch projection screen slowly descended against the glass wall, obscuring the glittering Manhattan skyline. "Distinguished members of the board, our esteemed institutional partners and friends," Chloe began, her voice projecting a flawless blend of warmth and corporate steel. She glanced briefly at David Miller, the Wall Street Journal reporter, who was sitting near the back, his pen poised over his notepad. "Tonight, we stand on the precipice of a historic milestone. Tomorrow morning, when the opening bell rings at the New York Stock Exchange, Vance Global will go public." A polite round of applause rippled through the room. Chloe smiled, her eyes flashing with a predatory, euphoric energy. She looked directly at Elena. But as we transition into a public entity, corporate governance and ethical leadership must become our absolute priorities, Chloe continued, her tone shifting into a heavier, more somber register. Investors do not just buy our stock, they buy our integrity. They buy our stability. And unfortunately, leadership sometimes requires us to face painful, hidden truths before the market forces us to. Julian sat up straight, his posture stiffening. What is she doing? He muttered, looking at his wife in confusion. Chloe pressed a button on a small remote control in her palm. To ensure absolute transparency, I have prepared a special compliance disclosure for the board. Before we finalize the IPO pricing tonight, we must address a severe reputational liability that has compromised our executive leadership. The projection screen flickered to life. Chloe expected the screen to display the high-definition photographs of Arthur Vance entering Hotel Suite 14B with Harper Stone, accompanied by the bank statements detailing the $50,000 illicit wire transfer. She had timed it perfectly with her private photographer downstairs. She was ready to watch Elena's face collapse into humiliation, ready to call for an immediate emergency vote to invoke the morality clause and strip the matriarch of her power. But the screen did not show photographs. Instead, a crystal-clear, live-streamed video feed appeared. The camera angle was high and wide, originating from a smoke detector inside a sleek, modern hotel suite. The digital watermark in the corner read, Suite 14B, live feed. Inside the room on the screen stood Arthur Vance, his jacket off, pacing the floor frantically. Sitting on the plush velvet sofa across from him was Harper Stone, looking calm and entirely unaffected by his panic. The audio blasted through the dining room's high-fidelity speakers with terrifying clarity. Asterisk, you don't understand, Harper. Asterisk, Arthur's voice boomed through the dining room, filled with a desperate, ragged terror. Asterisk, the compliance team is auditing the auxiliary accounts. If Elena sees that $50,000 went to your consultancy firm, she will ruin me. She monitors everything. Asterisk. The dining room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. 30 board members froze, their wine glasses suspended mid-air. Julian's mouth dropped open, his face draining of all color as he stared at the screen, witnessing his father's infidelity exposed to the entire financial elite of New York. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. A sudden, cold spike of adrenaline shot through her veins. This wasn't the live photo feed she had arranged. This was a video stream. Her fingers hammered the remote control, trying to shut the system down, but the screen remained locked, completely unresponsive to her commands. On the screen, Harper Stone leaned back, crossing her legs elegantly. Arthur, calm down. Harper's voice came through the speakers, smooth and calculated. Asterisk, you didn't steal the money. You just used the account. Besides, weren't you assured that the transaction was entirely safe? Asterisk. Asterisk, safe? Asterisk, Arthur laughed, a manic, broken sound. Asterisk, nothing is safe from Elena. I never should have agreed to this. I never should have let her introduce us. Asterisk. Asterisk, let who introduce us, Arthur? Asterisk, Harper asked smoothly, leaning forward slightly toward the hidden microphone. Asterisk, Chloe. Asterisk, Arthur snapped, wiping the sweat from his face. Asterisk, Chloe set the whole thing up. She told me you were completely vetted. She was the one who gave me the routing numbers for the offshore auxiliary account. She told me the compliance committee had already cleared it as a special creative acquisition fund, so Elena wouldn't flag it. She said it was a foolproof way for me to have my own money and my own life without Elena suffocating me. Asterisk. A collective, sharp gasp sucked the air out of the dining room. Chloe felt the world tilt violently on its axis. The silver microphone in her hand began to tremble. The room began to spin as 30 pairs of eyes slowly turned away from the screen and locked onto her. On the projection screen, Arthur continued to unravel, completely oblivious to his audience. Asterisk, Chloe swore to me that Elena would never find out. She said she was doing it to help me, to protect me from my wife's shadow. My God. If Elena finds out Chloe helped me hide this, she'll kill both of us. Asterisk. Don't worry, Arthur. Harper's voice echoed through the speakers, a chilling edge of finality in her tone. Asterisk, Elena already knows. Asterisk. With those words, the screen suddenly went black, leaving the dining room in a dark, agonizing silence. Chloe stood frozen at the center of the room, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Her mind raced, desperately trying to understand how her meticulous, brilliant coup had just turned into a public suicide note. She looked down the long table. Julian was staring at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of profound betrayal and absolute disgust. He didn't look like her husband anymore. He looked like a stranger who had just discovered a monster sleeping in his bed. And then there was Elena. Elena Vance slowly stood up from her seat at the head of the table. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look humiliated. The emerald silk gown caught the dim light as she stood tall, an absolute monarch reigning over the ruins of her enemies. She looked at Chloe with an expression of quiet, devastating pity. "Thank you, Chloe," Elena said, her voice cutting through the silent room like a diamond through glass, calm, resonant, and entirely victorious. That was indeed a remarkable disclosure. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound left in the dining room. Chloe stood paralyzed, the silver microphone slipping from her numb fingers and hitting the hardwood floor with a dull, hollow thud that echoed like a gunshot. "Julian." Chloe's voice was a desperate, reedy whisper as she looked at her husband. "Julian, it's not what it looks like. It's a setup. It's a deepfake. Someone hacked the system." "Sit down, Chloe," Elena interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute weight of a judicial sentence. Julian didn't look at his wife. He pulled his hands away from the table, burying his face in his palms, his shoulders shaking with the quiet, suffocating agony of a man whose entire world had just been exposed as a lie. The woman he loved hadn't just targeted his father. She had weaponized his family's vulnerability to destroy his mother. Elena stepped away from the head of the table, her emerald silk gown whispering against the floor as she walked toward the back of the room. She stopped directly behind David Miller, the Wall Street Journal reporter, and laid a gentle, manicured hand on the back of his chair. "Mr. Miller," Elena said, her tone remarkably conversational, "I believe you were promised an exclusive story tonight regarding a corporate governance failure within Vance Global. As you can see, the failure has been identified. And as chief executive, I am dealing with it transparently. You have your story. My assistant will provide you with the verified digital transcripts on your way out." Miller nodded slowly, his eyes wide with a mixture of professional awe and sheer intimidation. He quietly closed his notepad, stood up, and exited the room, knowing he had just witnessed the most expensive corporate execution in Manhattan history. Elena turned her gaze back to Chloe, who was trembling, her face drained of all color, looking small and fragile in her cream-colored dress. "You thought I was blind, Chloe," Elena said, walking slowly back to the center of the room. "You thought that because I loved my husband, I would let my pride dictate my actions. You assumed that a 30-year marriage meant 30 years of weakness. That was your first and fatal mistake." You knew?" Chloe choked out, her hands gripping the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. "I knew about Harper Stone within 48 hours of her recruitment," Elena said smoothly. "I monitored every single encrypted text you sent her. And when you authorized the $50,000 transfer from our auxiliary account, you didn't bypass compliance, Chloe. I am compliance. I personally routed that money through your private shell company, CV Holdings. You didn't catch Arthur in a trap. You funded a honey trap using your own corporate credentials." Elena gestured to Richard Sterling and the other board members, who were watching the unfolding drama with sharp, professional detachment. "Michael," Elena called out. Her estate attorney stood up from the far end of the table, pulling a thick leather folder from his briefcase. He walked over and slid a set of legal documents across the mahogany table, stopping right in front of Chloe. "What is this?" Chloe whispered, her eyes darting frantically over the legal text. "That is a standard corporate asset seizure and a non-disclosure agreement," Elena replied, her voice dropping into a cold, terrifying register. "Under the post-nuptial agreement Arthur signed in 2018, his documented infidelity, which you so beautifully broadcasted to our entire board, results in the immediate, total forfeiture of his inherited shares and marital assets to me. He leaves this family with nothing." Chloe swallowed hard, a tear finally cutting through her heavy makeup. And me? You signed a morality clause in your prenuptial agreement with my son, Chloe. Attempting to blackmail a senior executive, embezzling corporate funds for personal espionage, and attempting to sabotage an IPO constitutes criminal misconduct, Elena said, her eyes drilling into her daughter-in-law. You have two choices. You sign those papers right now. You surrender your corporate titles, you waive all rights to Julian's estate, and you leave the city tonight. If you sign, I will allow you to slip away into obscurity without charges. Elena leaned forward, her face inches from Chloe's. If you do not sign, the FBI will be waiting for you in the lobby in exactly 5 minutes for corporate fraud and extortion. Your career will be over, your Ivy League degree will be revoked for ethical malpractice, and you will spend the next 10 years of your life in a federal penitentiary. Choose. The room was dead silent. Chloe looked around the table, searching for an ally, a single face of mercy. She looked at Julian, but her husband refused to even lift his head. She had played the Game of Thrones, and she had lost everything. With trembling fingers, Chloe picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen from the table. She didn't look at the document as she signed her name, her signature jagged and broken. She dropped the pen, picked up her clutch, and walked toward the private elevator, her head bowed, entirely stripped of the arrogance she had worn like armor just an hour ago. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Elena took a slow, deep breath, her posture remaining completely unbroken. She turned to the silent board members, lifted her glass of champagne and smiled. Now, gentlemen, Elena said, her voice echoing with absolute authority. Let's finalize the pricing for the IPO. We have a market to conquer tomorrow morning. The opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange rang at exactly 9:30 a.m. the following morning, a crisp, metallic sound that signaled the public birth of Vance Global. On the trading floor, traders cheered as the ticker symbol VNC lit up the digital boards, opening at $34 a share, $2 above the target projection. Elena Vance stood on the balcony overlooking the trading floor, surrounded by flashing cameras and applauding executives. She wore a tailored cream blazer, her signature South Sea pearls catching the bright, artificial lights of the exchange. Her face was a flawless mask of corporate triumph. She smiled for the photographers, shook hands with the NYSE chairman, and answered questions from CNBC with the practiced, effortless grace of a seasoned monarch. But as the crowd began to migrate toward the champagne reception in the VIP lounge, Elena stepped away. She walked down a quiet, marble-lined corridor of the historic building, away from the noise, the applause, and the flashing lights. Julian was waiting for her by the arched windows at the end of the hall, looking out at the chaotic, sunlit streets of Wall Street below. He had his hands in his pockets, his posture heavy and deflated. The corporate victory meant nothing to him today. His eyes bore the exhaustion of a man who had spent the entire night watching his personal life dismantle. Elena walked up beside him, her heels quiet against the marble. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stood with him, sharing the silence, letting him feel her presence. Dad called me from a motel in New Jersey an hour ago, Julian said, his voice cracking slightly, devoid of its usual technical precision. He was crying, Mom. He kept saying he didn't know how things got so out of hand, that he was sorry, that he wanted to come home. I didn't know what to tell him. I hung up. Elena looked out the window. You did the right thing, Julian. Your father is a man who spent 30 years trying to escape the reality of his own choices. Forgiving him right now would only allow him to keep running. He needs to sit in the quiet of what he built. Julian turned to look at his mother, his eyes rimmed with red. And Chloe? Her lawyer called my team this morning. She's already signed the final dissolution papers. She's moving back to Chicago tonight. Mom, how did I miss it? How did I live with someone for 3 years and never see the person she actually was? I loved her. I trusted her with everything. Elena reached out, laying a gentle, firm hand on her son's shoulder. The maternal warmth in her touch was the only authentic thing she had allowed herself to feel all week. You didn't miss it because you were weak, Julian. You missed it because you are a good man who acts with integrity, and you expected the woman you loved to do the same, Elena said softly, her eyes locked onto his. People like Chloe don't show you their true face until they think they've already won. Do not let her malice make you cynical. The capacity to trust is your strength, not your flaw. Julian swallowed hard, nodding slowly as his mother's words began to anchor his fractured composure. Did you ever love him, Mom? Dad, I mean. Or was it always just about the company? The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Elena looked down at her wedding ring. A flawless 5-carat emerald-cut diamond that had sat on her finger for 3 decades. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the ring off her finger and dropped it into her handbag. I loved him completely, Julian, Elena said, her voice dropping into a quiet, emotionally raw register that she rarely revealed to anyone. I loved him enough to give him my youth, my father's respect, and half of the empire I built. But love is a partnership, not a charity. When a person decides to weaponize your devotion to feed their own vanity, they forfeit the right to your grief. She looked back out at the glittering skyline of the city she had conquered. I didn't destroy your father, Julian, and I didn't destroy Chloe. They built their own gallows out of arrogance and greed. I simply allowed them to hang themselves with the rope they bought. Julian took a deep, shaky breath, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He looked at his mother, seeing her not just as the formidable chief executive of Vance Global, but as a protector who had shielded him from a devastating betrayal. Come on, Julian said, offering a small, fragile smile as he extended his arm to her. The board is waiting for the majority shareholder to toast the opening valuation. Elena smiled, slipping her arm through her son's. Let's go. As they walked back toward the cheering crowd, Elena felt the final weight of the past week dissolve. She had lost a husband, and she had lost a daughter-in-law, but she had saved her son, and she had secured her legacy. True power, she realized, wasn't about never being hurt or never being targeted. It was about having the emotional discipline to stand entirely still in the eye of the storm, waiting for your enemies to mistake your silence for defeat, until the moment you turned their own weapons into your absolute salvation.